Eh bien, nous revoilà, encore une fois de plus, pour un nouvel épisode de Chaud Bouillant. Et donc aujourd'hui, on va faire l'épisode en anglais. So I'm going to switch to English because we're going to have a host coming from the US. We're going to have a chat today with Jordan, um, who I came across in a way in New York City when I was living there. And he was working at the time for Nordic Approach, when they were implementing business in the US. So today I'm super excited because he's going to introduce himself, but he has a lot of knowledge in coffee sourcing and a lot of different stuff that I'm not always aware of. So it's definitely a good opportunity for us to speak about a few stuff. So I see the first viewers joining right now. I hope Jordan is going to join us anytime soon. And then, of course, you can restream this and every previous episode on YouTube and also on the Instagram Live IGTV section on this account, so on Instagram. So I'm gonna have to wait a little. I see that Jordan has joined, so we're gonna connect in a minute and continue with this exciting talk, I hope. So I'm gonna try to connect right now. Let's see how it works. Okay, so I'm gonna wait for request to be sent, and we'll see. Salut Emmanuel, en direct de New York. And we have Jordan connecting right now. So, by the way, um, hey,
Hello,
hi Jordan.
how are you?
I'm good, and you?
It's nice to see you.
Yeah, nice indeed. It's been a while, so yeah, it's really nice. I'm really happy to host you today for this episode of Chaud Bouillant, which means boiling hot in French, but it's also an expression to say when we talk about topics or stuff that can be sensitive sometimes. But
Okay,
so yes.
we're gonna get edgy. Well,
Oh
no,
my
I'm
God.
I'm I'm really happy to be here, and yeah, thank you for including me.
Cool. Where are you at the moment then?
I'm in Maine, or in Maine rather, at my new home. Um,
Okay,
yeah,
nice.
so uh, we just moved here 1 week ago, and I have like a big forest and lots of woods, and yeah, it's really nice. Really happy.
Wow. So are you working from home most of the time right now?
Yeah, primarily. I mean, travel was really shut down, of course, with
Yes.
COVID, and so it's actually been quite nice to be flexible. I've been in Oregon with my family and here in Maine, and find new ways to communicate globally, which is really fun, actually.
Cool. Jordan, can you maybe introduce
Seaman,
yourself?
hey.
Can you maybe introduce yourself for people who don't know who you are and that might watch this video now or later?
Yeah, I'm so just kind of a quick intro to myself, I guess. Yeah, I've been working in coffee for, 10, 12 years now, I guess. And my story in coffee is very straightforward. I started as a barista in Montreal, and I was, kind of lucky to be in the right place at the right time, and got connected with some people who are now, very influential in the specialty industry, and they, gave me a lot of space to kind of move and be curious and explore. So I started at a cafe called Café Myriade, um, in Montreal, which at that time was owned by Scott Rao, who of course now has a big following.
Okay.
And it was a very exciting time to be at Myriad because Scott was, innovating a lot in the cafe space, in terms of like getting his extraction stuff and publishing his books and thinking about service. And it was a really amazing open window into how specialty coffee was taking shape at that time, in a time when it was still quite young and still finding an identity. Um, and the transformative moment for me was really when there was a talk by a woman named Mia Hansen, who has worked in lots of different roles in the coffee supply chain. But at that time, she was the green coffee buyer for 49th Parallel, who's a roaster in Vancouver. And she came to the cafe and gave a talk to, the staff and some of the community. And it really kind of just opened my eyes that coffee is something that comes from a place, and there are people who make it. And I mean, it sounds kind of simple to say so now, but at the time, it really transformed my thinking, and it made me realize that there's this whole world kind of below the surface. And I was focused at that time just on, brewing a great cup and kind of understanding that part of coffee. And I realized there's so much more to know. And that set off a chain of curiosity and learning. Um, and then from then I went on to, help start roasteries in Montreal. And then I moved to New York to work with an amazing quality focused roaster called Parlor Coffee. And with them, I was working in some of their sourcing and green coffee buying and quality assessment. And that was really fun. And immediately after I was at Parlor, I started working at a company called Nordic Approach, which I think for your audience is pretty well known.
Yes.
It's a green coffee importer at the highest end of specialty. I think very present in the coffee community and in Europe, and a really great group of people. And has been around for quite a long time. So they kind of know what they were doing. And I learned so much working with them. And yeah, so that's kind of brings me pretty close. In the summer, I moved over to being kind of like a freelance consultant, contract coffee guy. And my current work is focused in Colombia, where I work with a very large and quickly growing coffee producer. It's a company. It's not an individual, so it's a really amazing group of agronomists and farm workers, business people, people all across, every role in the coffee industry up to export. And that's been, learning a lot that way, and that's a step outside of my normal kind of high-end specialty role. So I'm also learning a lot there. In addition to that, I do, a little bit of kind of sourcing and brokering, I guess, for roasters, helping connect new roasters with coffees across the quality spectrum, and doing consulting on that end of things. So helping people build supply chains that meet their needs, whether those needs are quality based or sustainability based. Kind of building out an entire program for people and helping them find coffees that really connect with their mission.
That's okay. Wow.
So that's my bio. Yeah, that's the CV.
Yes. Okay. Cool. But so the idea of this talk and session is because on a personal level, a professional personal level, I'm not really aware of all the steps you work in, meaning like what happens on the importing side and as being a importer, broker, sourcer. This is a blurry area to me, and it's true that often in the specialty coffee industry, when we are, let's say, on the other side, more like brewing or teaching or stuff like that, it's very things are very simplified in the way we understand the journey of coffee. It's like you have a producer, then you have an importer, or sometimes you don't have an importer. It's what we call direct trade. And then basically that's it. The coffee gets to the roastery. I feel the more I talk with people during the sessions, the more things get very complex in a way. And It's not that easy, I guess. So what is a typical day or what is really your work, I would say, on site? Does it mean you travel to Colombia a lot of time, or when you advise roasteries, does it mean that you make connections, or you help also importing the coffee, or what is it that you do?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and you're right. There's a lot of kind of complicated details, and there's also a lot of, like you're hinting at, some language around things that tends to simplify the coffee supply chain or the coffee value chain. And, I think on the one hand, some of that language is helpful because it kind of describes a different way of having coffee relationships, and it avoids lengthy explanation because it's very easy to kind of get caught up in the details. And
Yeah.
you know, my friends and family often start yawning when I tell them what I do because it kind of gets to that place. But I mean, to answer your question, you know, there's a large range of players in the coffee industry, a large range of people who have a role to play in bringing coffee, you know, from seed to cup, so to speak. And my role currently is kind of finding, I mean, the two things that I do, one is finding roasters for coffees. So working with producers and helping them find markets for coffees. And so that sounds as simple as, you know, calling my friends who are coffee roasters and saying, hey guys, do you want to buy these coffees? Or I think you'll really like these coffees. But more than that, it is a lot about kind of building the relationships with importers. So, you know, these are companies that act as freight companies, as financing companies, and logistics. And essentially, what the role of an importer is to buy coffee from an exporter, arrange shipment, bring it to the country of destination, and then warehouse that coffee. Mm-hmm. And it sounds really simple, but it's, you know, for specialty coffee, it's very difficult. The coffees are very expensive, so financing can become quite risky. Warehousing can be difficult to find good warehousing because most coffee warehouses are designed for commercial coffees, so very large volume instead of the small volume that more specialty players work in. And then there's just kind of working efficiently. And so the role of an importer is to move coffee really quickly so that it arrives in, you know, fresh and in a state that represents, you know, what the coffee was when it left the country of origin, or best represents the coffee that was produced. So, you know, in my current role, kind of interface with importers. So I kind of connect them with the producer, connect them with the end roaster, and kind of help facilitate that relationship. So, you know, roasters have different values and different needs in the interaction, and importers have different ways of working, different requirements and mandates. So it's kind of about helping facilitate that conversation a lot of the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's go to a few questions then. Maybe the first to start is what for you, what is the difference between commodity coffee and specialty coffee? What does make a difference between those two different types of coffee?
Yeah, I mean, there's some very standard definitions out there around kind of cup score and the points that a coffee is assigned in quality. I do think specialty also has, you know, a higher level of interest in issues of sustainability, so environmental, economic, and social stability, or sustainability, I should say. And commercial coffee is, you know, traded in different ways. It's generally lower quality and has a much broader range of metrics that it's trying to meet. Specialty coffee is expensive, it tastes great, and it represents values of things like traceability, high cup score, maybe unique processing, unique variety. That's kind of generally how I make the distinction. I mean, you know, you can say specialty is everything 85 plus in the cupping score. I think that oversimplifies things because there's coffees produced commercially that I would cup, you know, 87, 88 points. And then there's also coffees produced in specialty that I think are terrible in terms of cup quality. And so, you know, for me personally, and I guess this is getting to your point of being a little bit controversial maybe, is I really think I like to think about coffees that are distinguished by values. So coffees that are distinguished in terms of specialty by, you know, having an environmental, social impact, having an economic impact, as opposed to strictly being a cup score difference. And commercial coffees, things that are, you know, produced without the same intention, although sometimes they are, and that's, you know, gets complicated.
And yeah, one of the question I'm because I'm really trying to understand So as far as I understand, your definition between the commodity and specialty is not really based on quality, but more on practice, um, if I understand well. But not only, I would say, but to me, I'm always wondering, like, if we think about the quality score and we talk about 80 or 85% for specialty, and then lower than 80%, it's probably commodity as the official definition. I'm always wonder, is it what is in between in terms of quality or trading practice when it comes to coffee that are not specialty, or that may be below 80% on the CA score sheet or whatever, but that are not also the pure commodity in the worst way it can be. What exists in between? Because it's very, to me, very complicated to understand. Is there different level of quality or practice in commodity coffee, for instance, if we consider that specialty ticks all the boxes? And how does this happen? Who decides what is better and not, if the score sheet and stuff like that are not at the center of the attention for that practice?
You know, it's a really interesting question, and it's not that simple to answer. But one way of answering that question would be to think of specialty and commercial coffees as coffees that are traded differently. So commodity coffee may be produced or sold for a specific market or to be traded in a specific way, where specialty coffee is maybe produced and assessed looking for traits that have, you know, either quality, high-end quality at stake, or issues of sustainability as part of the kind of package of the coffee. So they kind of move in different avenues and are intended for different audiences. You know, it is very possible to taste coffees that are produced for the commodity market that you might think are great coffees and might be specialty in terms of cup score. But you may not be presented them as a specialty roaster because you're looking in different places and working with different people.
Okay. And is there like, if you talk about, again, maybe about commodity, how does added value, because I'm always told the commodity coffee is based on the exchange, on the sea market. And sometimes I feel like people, I don't know, here in Belgium, you have like old school roasteries, and they have like, they buy obviously commodity coffee, but in an old way. So they still advertise, this is better, this is a specific blend, or this is Java and Mocha and Imperial or whatever. And there are different prices. And so I'm always wondering what type of beans can be behind this. And are those roastery paying a higher price when they buy green beans, or it's more them who add value and market those coffee differently? Do you have any experience in that?
I mean, the short answer is probably yes. They're probably paying more for those coffees, but maybe not as much as you think that should be paid for them, or enough to, you know, have a remarkable impact on the production side. And yes, they're probably putting a lot into marketing those coffees and kind of building a product for them to sell them as something that is distinguished. You know, and I think
Okay.
what you're hinting at in your question is, you know, maybe a more commercial roastery or coffee company kind of co-opting the language of specialty and co-opting the language of direct trade in order to capitalize on that market. You know, now that specialties, you know, build this amazing market for people that are interested in very special coffees. So it, you know, yeah, I think that answers your question.
But so, okay, if you think
I mean,
about
I think the thing I want to say, Thomas, is that I'm not an expert in commodity trading, and I'm not an
yeah,
expert in, you know, the C index and, you know, those kinds of futures contracts and that kind of stuff. It's very complicated and it's very confusing. And, you know, I mean, that is part of why that system of trading is really left to traders and people that act, you know, similarly to in the stock market,
yeah,
trying to find a good deal. And I think the important part of understanding the C market is that it's controlled by, you know, people interested in finance and, you know, large commodity traders whose interest is in having the best value for their product, and that means lower prices. And so, you know, coffee producers generally are more disadvantaged in that kind of transaction. And so, you know, the commodity market pushes prices down or tries to push prices down. And
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. But this is very complicated to me to approach people who do a pure commodity. So that's why I have people who work in specialty, and I'm asking questions about commodity, and every time they're like, "I'm not a commodity specialist," which makes sense. But it's just sometimes, to me, it's still complicated to have people in commodity willing to join this talk and talk about it, because it seems it's a whole different world and a complicated hidden world. And as you said, like the producer is definitely not benefiting from that way of trading coffee. But to me, it's just sometimes I try to understand what is the option as a roaster when you don't buy specialty. Does it mean that you go to a warehouse and you have a catalog of price and then you have slightly different price because maybe some exporter add premiums? They consider that bigger beans is more expensive than smaller beans, or maybe the opposite, I don't know. Or that they can sort out, I don't know, to create added value in the dry mill or at the expense of the producer, actually. But is there something that can happen still to differentiate prices? And that's that moment before a roaster buys coffee on a catalog, or I don't even know what is the process.
yeah, and I really understand your kind of questioning and your curiosity there. And I think a lot of us in the coffee world at every level also struggle with similar questions. And I have friends that work in the commodity market in commercial coffees, and they have similar questions about specialty. You know, why do you guys think these coffees are so special? Why do you pay so much money for them? You know, or why do you think that you, as a tiny roaster, paying such a high price for a coffee is actually impactful? Because, you know, I'm impersonating the commodity trader, but, you know, they're buying 50 containers, 100 containers of coffee. There's huge volumes of coffee. And, you know, moving the needle slightly by a penny or two or making investments in production, there is impact there. And that's important impact. You know, by and large, most of the coffee, you know, 98% of the coffee produced in the world is, you know, what we would call commodity coffee. And so, you know, any changes in that realm are very impactful. And, you know, you see, you know, large coffee companies, Nespresso, McDonald's, you know, these kinds of companies that make small investments in environmental initiatives or social impact initiatives, and they do have impact. And they may not be enough, and we may think that they can do more. But, you know, it's a very different way of approaching coffee. You know, and the other thing I want to kind of say on this subject is there's a vast diversity of ways that coffee is produced. And, you know, in Colombia, we have a great example of where a small producer with a couple of hectares, you know, 5-10 hectares of land can produce coffee and have a market for the coffee and have some options to sell their coffee, you know, maybe directly to a roaster, you know, through export and import partners, but they may also choose to sell the coffee, you know, to the national coffee buying body in Colombia or to a more commercial company like Nespresso. And, you know, but that's not the case everywhere. In Ethiopia, for example, we have smallholder producers that have tiny amounts of coffee in production and don't have access because of government regulation and trading regulations to actually sell their coffee individually to a roaster. You know, in the context of Ethiopia, that's changing a little bit right now. But, you know, in Ethiopia, generally a coffee farmer would sell cherry, so, you know, unprocessed coffee, to, you know, maybe an exporter, and that exporter owns kind of the means of production in terms of, you know, processing the coffee and turning it into green coffee.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, and then that coffee is moved to Addis, and then maybe it's sold by the exporter to an importer, but it could also be sold to another broker intermediary before it moves on to an importer. And every country is different, and every coffee producing country has nuance. Brazil has these giant farms and have direct access to markets. You know, and some, you know, of these larger producers, they produce exportable grade coffee and may export it themselves.
Mm.
So this is why, you know, it becomes very difficult to find a strict definition for specialty, because it may mean something different in Colombia than it does in Ethiopia, than it does in Indonesia or Vietnam or Brazil. And so it's why, you know, strictly focusing on cup score can't be the answer, because, you know, you could find coffee produced, you know, in a commercial way that isn't traceable but has a high cup score. Or you could find a coffee that's traceable to a producer and has a really great story, and the coffee doesn't taste good. And, you know, how do we define that distinction?
Yes,
Very,
yes.
very challenging questions. And, you know, there's a lot of people involved.
And do you think that coffee become okay? A few a few questions, but do you, is it the good guys against the bad guys? So it's a, well, I guess it's not really that simple. It's a more complex business. But my question is also, as a producer, you have to sell to the sea market also. It's impossible to produce only specialty. So it's kind of both way of trading coffee seems necessary. Is it the case according to you?
Right. Well, I just want to clarify something. I mean, I don't think you sell coffee to the C market. The C market isn't
Yeah, sorry.
a buyer. No, and I'm not. I'm not. I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to be pointed here. But what I mean is that, you know, there are lots of markets that a producer would have access to. And so to return to my previous example, you know, in Colombia, you may be a coffee producer, and, you know, have 10 hectares of land, and you might produce, you know, 20 bags of coffee that is considered specialty and can achieve a high price. And so you may be able to choose the buyer for that coffee through a relationship you might have. But then you have all of this other production that didn't reach the quality standard. And you'll have other markets for that. Maybe it's, you know, Nespresso. Maybe it's the FNC, which is the National Coffee Association in Colombia. Maybe it's Starbucks, you know, and there's lots of different options for coffees that kind of hit different metrics. And one of those metrics is cup score, but another one might be, are you, you know, fair trade certified? Are you Rainforest Alliance certified? You know, or do you just have the right relationships?
Yes.
So
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, tell me.
No, it's okay. It's I mean, to answer your question, right, you have, you know, you can't support coffee only on specialty, and I think that is true. There is, every coffee producer has a range of production, you know, whether it's high-end specialty or medium specialty and lower end coffees, undergrades, they're called sometimes. I think one of the fascinating things about the coffee industry is that every coffee bean that is produced is sold, and every coffee bean that is produced is roasted and consumed somewhere. And it's a really fascinating puzzle to think about, because there's so much coffee in the world. And whether it's the worst coffee you've ever seen, I've seen some terrible coffees that are mixed with stones and string, and it's, you know, you would look at it and think it's rotten garbage. And that coffee is bought and sold somewhere.
Wow.
And, you know, and then the most beautiful coffees in the world too might come from and are bought and sold. And it's a matter of price and a matter of timeline. And, you know, I think the issue of that you're trying to get at is that generally the scale is tipped towards keeping prices lower than really rewarding higher prices for coffee. And that the low end, or kind of the standardized pricing for coffee globally, is below a cost of production for producers and below what is actually sustainable for coffee production, and helping coffee producers achieve a reasonable livelihood.
What are the solution for that for producer when they have to sell under the cost of production? Does it mean that they grow other stuff to sustain in a different way, or that they have to put money on the table because it's lower than the cost of production? So in a way, they have to, what, you have 1 or 2 harvests a year to the best. So what does happen when you sell below the cost of production? What's the reality of a producer selling like that?
Yeah, it's bleak. It's you know, I know personally coffee producers who are in debt because of, you know, trying to achieve higher prices in coffees that never matriculate. You know, I mean, in countries like Honduras and I mean, all over the place, the age of coffee producers is getting older. So there's very few young coffee producers in the world, and over generations of coffee production, um, people have seen, and I think people in coffee producing countries have seen that this isn't maybe a viable source of income. And so, farms are being abandoned wholesale. People are moving to cities to do other things,
Wow.
and or people live in poverty, and that is a reality of the coffee industry.
What would be the biggest challenge for a young producer that would like to, how do you say, take over the family plantation and do a good job? What would be the right challenge to address to make it sustainable? I guess it's the specialty trade, but is there something specific like
I don't think it's necessarily the specialty trade. I think it's about understanding. It's about approaching coffee production with a business model, and it's about understanding, how much coffee you can produce at what quality level, and and choosing a market that's going to be sustainable for your production. So it may make sense for one farmer to produce coffee, at a pretty low score, say 80 points, 81 points, but be able to consistently achieve that price or that quality level, and know that that price is going to cover their cost of production, and then of course some income on top of that. That may be the solution for some coffee producers, depending on the type of variety that you're growing, if it's organic or not, what the farmland itself is like. I think for some people that's a sustainable solution. I think, for others, achieving, great coffees and being very quality focused can also be a way to bring in high income and offset costs of other losses, But producing beautiful coffee is generally, incredibly labor intensive, risky, and just difficult overall. And so, and specialty coffee is known for being a fickle market, and the market taste may change, leaving a producer who's invested a lot into producing coffee that way behind. So to answer your question, if is it like, what's the advice to a young coffee producer? I think the key to successful coffee production is a sound business model. And, I think there's a lot of challenges for people trying to produce coffee who don't have access to the resources that you and I might take for granted in terms of understanding business and understanding markets.
Also, like based on your experience, do producer taste coffee, and are they able to how do you say, to negotiate the price, or is there a problem of lack of education when it comes to coffee, actually, to be able to understand what you grow, and is it can you negotiate a better price or premium when you sell it?
Yeah, I understand. And I think that exists for sure, right? I think there exists, what's the word, like a divorce between the expression of coffee in a market and kind of what a producer might see as the product. So I'm struggling with my words, but I think you're right that often coffee producers, or sometimes coffee producers, don't have access to what coffee looks like in its final expression, and therefore the value of the coffee can be kind of arbitrary. What you're willing to sell it for and what the market's willing to buy it for. And there's some really interesting research done by some friends of mine, and kind of initiatives around building consumption or building cultures of coffee consumption in producing countries. And countries that have a culture of coffee consumption can often kind of better understand the product. It's not a one-to-one relationship, but I think there's like kind of interesting work to be done around that, about putting more power in the hands of coffee producers, especially smallholder producers, in terms of understanding, how coffee gets expressed. Hi, Zane.
But so let's imagine a producer have a better understanding of the coffee he grows. Does it mean she or he will be able to negotiate, or it's hard to negotiate in the system of selling and buying and trading? And
I think it's,
you see what I mean, huh?
Yeah, of course. And I think it is there is a way, and that's empowering to understand your coffee. Um, but I also think that the market is very challenging for everyone, and um, that there's, I'm not a coffee producer, but I think the cards are really stacked against smallholder producers, and that's one piece of it. But it's also, if there's a lot of people producing a lot of great coffees one year, the price is going to be down for high quality coffee. That's just a reality of supply and demand. Um,
Mm.
and so I don't think it's the only thing at stake. Um, and yeah, there's lots of other disadvantages that coffee producers face, whether it's poverty or, climate change, community violence, all kinds of things, that happen.
Mm. Um, Another question, it's maybe also about roasting in producing countries. Based
Hmm.
on also your experience, do you see a shift in producing countries who start to roast also locally, or to start to sell coffee more? Is there something happening right now?
I think that's a really fun question to think about. I mean, and I only know anecdotally, and I find it very interesting that, in definitely like cities like Medellin and Colombia, there's like incredible coffee shops and roasting companies, most of which are pretty new. And, there's a really vibrant coffee culture around them. In Mexico, I mean, there's incredible coffee produced there and incredible coffee shops and people in that community like doing really interesting things that are kind of globally relevant in terms of specialty coffee. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite things when I'm traveling for work and exploring is seeing like these incredible cafes and unique ways of roasting coffee and brewing coffee at origin. Addis has some cool coffee shops in Ethiopia. Um, yeah. So I mean, I think you're right that there like it seems like there's more and more of that happening, but um, I think it's more of a kind of global interest in specialty coffee and kind of more um, financially secure coffee consumers in producing countries, maybe. I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, I want to go back to some stuff you mentioned about the labels. Like there are many labels now existing, whether it's organic or UTZ, rainforest, fair trade, different, so many labels. We know that most of the labels are related to commodity, if I'm not wrong, and it seems like something necessary in an industry that might be in crisis. But do they have a role to play in specialty also, or maybe I'm wrong? What's your opinion on this?
I don't have a straightforward opinion. I think each certification means, something different. And, I it's a challenging question because I don't think, any certification is 100% the right answer. And they're also not exclusive, right? So a coffee could be fair trade and Rainforest Alliance and organic and cup 89 points and be sold in the specialty market by a smallholder producer. Like all of those things are kind of possible. I mean, that might be very rare, but the point is, certification is often part of a program that oh,
Wait,
maybe.
yeah,
Oh,
okay, you're back. Yeah, it's fine.
certification may be something that is demanded by a large, commercial coffee company on the roasting side. And so, for example, from what I understand, McDonald's only buys Rainforest Alliance certified coffees. And that's an environmental initiative on their part. They didn't start Rainforest Alliance, but that's what they've kind of chosen as their metric of environmental sustainability. Um, but, I've tasted amazing coffees that would be sold in the highest end specialty coffees that are Rainforest Alliance certified. Um, so it does, what does it mean? It means whatever the parameters of RFA actually are. It doesn't mean that the coffee is amazing. It doesn't mean the coffee is terrible. It doesn't mean that it's you know, elevating a coffee producer to, you know, above the poverty line, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's holding them back either. You know, it means something. I don't know what RFA actually means, but it's something about preserving forests. I should learn more.
Yeah, but there are so many labels that even I don't know, in Belgium for a lot of consumer it's very confusing because nobody understands really on the end consumer point of view like the labels except organic, and even though if you ask people they think it means quality where it means no synthetic pesticides, which is a different stuff. So I feel it adds confusion to a lot of consumer because the moment they see a label, they think it's good all the way, and there's not so many questions asked. I mean, really on the end consumer point of view, at least here. So it's more like, oh, there's a label, it's good.
Here's a controversial opinion that I don't hold 100%, but you know, that may be the failure of coffee roasters of being able to articulate a message about their coffee. And so, you know, what I think successful coffee companies have done, or some successful coffee companies have done, is they've been able to advertise those labels to the coffee consuming public as something that is good. And they've been able to build a market for people and help people understand that buying organic coffee is good, buying fair trade coffee is good, you know, or whatever label is on the coffee. You know, if you put on your business cap, that's a success. You've successfully built a brand for the label on your coffee. And what specialty coffee, you know, has failed to do is build a clearly defined market where a coffee consumer can reach for any coffee bag on the shelf at the grocery store and understand this is good, right? And it might make you feel special, like, oh, this is fancy coffee or whatever, and I'm a foodie, so then I'm going to buy this bag. But you know, those trends come and go, and things fall in and out of fashion. I don't think I'm offending anybody too much when I say that. I mean, I think that's generally a problem facing the specialty coffee movement, and yeah.
So do you think there should be a specialty label, whatever it would mean to be created, and how is this even possible? Because it seems very complicated to, I don't know, create, manage, and monitor labels and values behind the label or anything related to that. So
no, I don't think. I think the idea of specialty coffee is confused because it was confusing from the beginning, and this, you know, specialty coffee, third wave coffee, whatever, comes out of a group of like really driven and smart professionals who wanted to change the way coffee was bought and sold. And I think those people did, you know, something incredible, and they really changed the coffee industry. But I don't think it's the best possible expression of coffee trading and coffee value chains. I think there's lots of other things that are becoming more relevant in addition to cup score, or in addition to direct trade.
Speaking of which, do you have any insight about, I hear more often the use of blockchain to be able to trace a lot of stuff other than the quality? Is this something that's going to see the daylight anytime soon? Because I don't really understand how this could be implemented.
Yeah, I mean, I don't either, to be honest.
No one knows.
No, I don't, and I wish that I did, and I feel like it's a blind spot. People ask me about it all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And it seems on the surface to make sense, right? That the kind of the secure transfer of information about, you know, financial transactions in coffee and the transparency there, or like you said, which is really interesting, is kind of including lots of different bits of information in addition to quality in a transaction around coffee. And yeah, I have no idea how it's implemented. There's a few really interesting companies out there that are trying to do it, and you know, I think if someone figures it out, it's a great path. Yeah. But I'm sorry. I wish I could say more.
No. I mean, it's because I also have seen a conference about it in Boston during the SCA show, and I was very confused because I'm not a blockchain expert, but to me it seems like an open information, but the tools to make it seems to me to have been implemented by companies. So at some point, something is still owned, but maybe I misunderstood, but it's still a bit confusing to me, those things. And it seems that producers have to be connected in a way to be part of this blockchain technology. So I guess that there is more progress or study or research to be done, but it's a bit of confusing.
Yeah.
Back to another question, like also when we talked about marketing and like maybe supermarket coffee using the same wording as a specialty high-end roastery, as stuff like that. As let's say, as someone, a non-coffee person willing to buy and make something good in buying better coffee, how is it possible? What information for you would be a trigger to say, okay, this is actually an information that makes a difference on a coffee bag? Let me explain. Like, I was working for a company who was basically advertising a lot about caring about the people and the quality and everything. Having the story of a cooperative, pictures of producers and a hospital and a small school. And then the price, the price they were buying coffee was below the cost of production. So as a consumer, you have the full story. And then the reality is that, I don't know how to explain that, but so as an end consumer, is there something that can help to really make a choice? Because it seems sometimes really hard to know what's going on, as simple as that.
Yeah. And I mean, hopefully that's not intentional on the part of these companies, right? And hopefully it's not as malicious as we can make it sound, that it's about tricking and intentionally obscuring what the path of coffee really is. I don't have a quick answer for that question. I think in general, smaller kind of quality focused roasters do work in better supply chains and with partners who share similar values. And I think it's very reasonable to kind of ask questions about transparency in the value chain, traceability of coffee to your local roaster. I think those questions are appropriate to ask. And I think this isn't to say that all commercially available coffees or coffees that you find at your supermarket or in big chains are, bad coffees. But what I think, if you're a consumer who's wanting to kind of get start asking the right questions and kind of get the information that might make you feel comfortable, that, the kind of key areas are around transparency and traceability in the value chain. Asking questions like, where does this coffee come from? Is it a cooperative? Is it a single producer? What kind of trading partners do you work with to get this coffee? And they seem kind of like very intimate questions to ask someone who's running a business, and they are, but I think specialty coffee is open to them mostly, and that but that's the direction that kind of the leadership in changing the coffee industry is going, is really pushing on these questions. So, I mean, actually, I want to mention one company that now that I'm thinking about it, is very interesting. It's not a company; it's an organization, and it's called Transparent Trade. And there's a few folks doing this, and it's there's a group of people that are involved in building transparency and empowering coffee producers in the transparency. There's a specialty coffee transaction guide that's coming out of Emory University, and it's a really incredible group of people that are aggregating data from specialty coffee and building based on, at first on country, and then maybe even broken down smaller than that, what kind of baseline prices based on quality are. And this data is meant to actually be used by coffee producers to understand that 84 points in coffee gets, in average in my market, $2 or whatever it is, depending on where you are. And that's a key piece of information that coffee producers can use to be more empowered in negotiating around the value of their coffee. And coming out of that group is a group of roasters. So that's the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide. Coming out of that group is a group that are doing something called the Pledge. And they're essentially pledging to sharing their FOB costs. So their costs basically at origin of coffee, which is one benchmark of measuring, is coffee paid at a reasonable price or not. Yeah. And so I think, asking if people know about the transaction guide, asking about if they know about the pledge for transparency, if your local roaster knows about that, they probably share your values, I guess.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe a totally different question. What is on the other side, let's say on totally the other side, what is the typical journey of 90 plus coffee?
So I don't think there is one, and I mean, I think you know that too. I think
yeah, or maybe do you have an example of what would be the journey of a 90 plus coffee? Like
well, I mean, a 90 plus coffee would probably be a coffee that is produced with intention. So produced by a coffee producer, either large scale or small, that has an interest in unique variety and unique processing and care in processing. And that coffee would be, well attended in its kind of agronomical life and in its post-production life. So, it's not necessarily organic, but it's, grown in a unique place or with unique varietals, whether that's, high altitude Kenyan coffees or, a special variety grown in Panama. And, that would be processed with great care with someone who, by someone who has a lot of knowledge about coffee processing and a knowledge about the effects of, washing the coffee and fermenting the coffee and what that would do to its final expression. And then finally, I mean, the coffee would be, bought and sold fresh. So it would be produced and sold and brought to the consuming market in Europe or anywhere consuming market really rapidly, and then roasted and served quickly. That's kind of the story. I don't really care about these coffees, to be honest.
No, but maybe a hidden question behind is that do coffee go in auction? Is this something common for coffee to be sold in auction, for instance? Is this...
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's the Cup of Excellence, which is a kind of organization that was started to kind of help achieve higher value and demonstrate higher value for coffees. And so, a panel of experts, both from the country of production, happens all over the world, and both the country of production and also, people from globally kind of get together and taste a bunch of coffees and then choose their favorites, evaluate them, and kind of the highest average scores are rewarded with prizes and sold at auction. And I mean, incredible coffees come out of that. And, I think it raises awareness of quality as a potential to achieve higher prices. Is it a model to be replicated for all of quality coffee? Of course not. It happens at a very small scale. But it is an interesting kind of educational tool around building awareness for great coffees.
Okay, I think we're slowly going towards the end of this talk. We have a few minutes left, but maybe I had like two other questions. Like when you talk about good coffee, is the fermentation a key element into having a great coffee, or is also like the soil? well, of course, all of these elements come in the mix, but there's so much going on in fermentation and research and innovation and experimental fermentation. Do you think this is a new and a developing element that will bring more better coffee or crazy coffee or new experiences
Sure. I think process-driven coffees, like you're talking about, can taste very remarkable, and so they can be kind of gateway drugs for coffee consumers, right? And having your first super funky natural might change your opinion of, as a consumer, what coffee might be. But I do not think that that is a sustainable and growth-oriented solution to coffee production. I think those coffees are difficult to produce. They're often bad. They're divisive. Not everybody likes them. And so, they have a place in kind of being like, whoa, that's a weird coffee. I didn't know coffee could be like that. But I don't think they're necessarily going to solve the kinds of problems that we're talking about. And since we only have 4 minutes left, I would love to shift the conversation, and kind of issue a challenge to specialty coffee roasters to think a little bit more broadly about how they're defining quality. And so, like, your question is, you're talking about processing, or what is a 90-point coffee, or, how do great coffees get made? And I think if we think about coffees outside of cup score and outside of, the cupping room, and kind of, this removed set of specialists tasting coffee, and think actually more about quality as inclusive of things like cost of production, things like environmental sustainability,
Yes.
things like transparency, and bringing those questions to the cupping table, bringing those questions to importers and exporters, and saying, what can we do that's going to kind of envelop a broader picture of our values as coffee companies, and invest in that. And so it may mean turning down the 89-point coffee that costs $5 a pound. It may mean opening up to a coffee that costs $3.50, but is bought and sold at a benchmark of paying above the cost of production to a producer. And to me, that's a much better coffee. I think that's a good coffee. And I think, the cup score is, it tastes nice, but it's not going to taste nice in 10 years when the coffee industry crumbles.
Yeah, oh my God. No, but it makes sense. It totally makes sense, actually. The quality is not only about the taste, but more like a global, how do you say, practice or way of doing coffee and all those different aspects. How...
There's lots of issues facing coffee producers, climate change, like I said, community violence, all kinds of things. And, investing in addressing the real problems that face coffee production in their unique circumstances is certainly a way forward. And, whether that's reforestation in one place, or, building schools and facilitating education in another place, we're really listening to what a coffee producing community is asking for in terms of, assistance, if any. Or it maybe just means paying higher prices for coffees and letting it work itself out. I mean, that's also a very viable solution.
But wait, because now I'm super confused, and I couldn't agree more on what you say. But so it means that specialty seems more obsessed with quality. Can we say that? And then that we can find good coffee in other networks of buying coffee, or...
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I think, speaking in very general terms, that specialty has kind of isolated itself in a world that focuses only on cup quality and the flavor in the cup. And I think there's lots and lots of other ways of thinking about coffee. And I would challenge, specialty focused roasters to think more creatively about how they're addressing issues of sustainability in their coffee value chains. And I'm speaking directly to roasters when I say that, because that's largely what my community is. And to coffee consumers, I would say, push your roasters to think creatively about those kinds of issues, and push yourself to better understand where coffee is coming from. Ask harder questions, and get to know your local roaster.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess you kind of answered my last question. That was, what is the best coffee in the world?
Oh
Well,
man, there's lots of wonderful coffees out there, and I mean that's also, that's kind of how we started this conversation, is there's a lot of questions to ask and a lot of coffees to taste and to think about and understand where they come from. And I think, yeah, I think the greatest coffee in the world is is a coffee that tastes nice and kind of tastes good to you, but also is produced without harming anyone and produced kind of sustainably. And there's nothing really more, without getting into the complicated details, than we can say. But there's no one particular roaster or one particular coffee. I think there's a lot of people doing a good job, and I think there's a lot of coffees that taste great. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I guess we reaching the end of the talk, but what can I wish you for the future?
Sorry?
What can I wish you for the close future? What's
What can you
your
wish me?
yes?
Um, I'm actually I want to thank you, Thomas, for bringing me into the conversation. And the past couple of months, I've retreated a little bit, and it's actually been really nice preparing to talk to you and thinking more and again about coffee. And this conversation has actually gotten me quite excited about some of the things that are important to me. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. But thanks for participating, and yeah, I don't know. I never know how to end the talk, so I guess we'll be in touch. And thank you very much,
Yeah, it
Jordan.
sounds great, man. It's really great to see you, and I mean, thanks for hosting these things and asking the difficult questions. I think it's great, and I wish you the best of luck in continuing these conversations. Yeah.
Well, same for you. Okay, cool. I
Cool,
guess
man.
we'll see each other in the coming years. I don't know when, but to be continued. Okay, cool.
All right. Sounds great,
Th
man. Bye bye.
Thanks
Merci.
a lot, Jordan. Bye.